chalk snapped in Samuel's hand. Around him, 4 white men went silent. On the workshop floor lay the impossible. A 12-year-old slave boy had just solved what master carpenter Klaus couldn't solve in 3 weeks. Perfect geometric calculations for a spiral staircase. Angles precise to the degree. Measurements that would actually work. But that wasn't the part that made Samuel's blood run cold. It was the look on Overseer Jackson's face. Not anger, not confusion, terror. Because in 1859, Virginia, 6 weeks after John Brown tried to start a slave rebellion, a Negro boy being this intelligent wasn't just unusual. It was dangerous. It was the kind of thing that got you sold downriver. Or worse. Samuel's hands trembled as he stared at what he'd done. The numbers had just appeared in his mind, like a language he'd always known but never spoken. 3 weeks he'd watched Klaus struggle with this problem, the angles for Master Thornton's grand staircase, and Samuel had seen the error immediately. The miscalculation in the curve, the way the steps would be uneven if built according to Klaus's plans. He'd only meant to help. He'd just made the biggest mistake of his life. What Samuel didn't know, what nobody knew yet, was that his master, Richard Thornton, had a visitor arriving that very evening. Dr. Edmund Cartwright from Richmond, a scientist who'd spent 10 years measuring Negro skulls to prove they were inferior. A man who'd published papers with titles like The Limited Capacity of the African Mind and Cranial Evidence for Natural Servitude. And tomorrow morning, that same doctor would be standing in this workshop, staring at chalk marks that would destroy his life's work. But before we get to what happened when the doctor arrived, you need to understand the one thing Samuel had that even his master couldn't take away. His mind was a trap for numbers. Since he was 6 years old, Samuel could look at a pile of corn and know exactly how many kernels. Could watch clouds and calculate when rain would fall. Could hear his mother's footsteps and know her exact pace, her exact distance, her exact time of arrival. He'd never been taught to read, never held a book, never seen the inside of a schoolhouse. But mathematics spoke to him the way music speaks to some people. Natural, undeniable, beautiful. His mother, Sarah, had warned him 1,000 times. Keep your head down, boy. Don't let them see what you can do. Smart slaves don't live long. They get sold, or they get dead. But Samuel had one friend who'd seen glimpses of his gift. Klaus, the old German carpenter with rough hands and a rougher accent. Klaus, who'd been an indentured servant himself once, who understood what it meant to be owned. 3 months ago, Klaus had been doing calculations on scrap wood, muttering in German, frustrated. Samuel had been sweeping, watching, and without thinking he'd whispered, "The angle's wrong, Mr. Klaus. Should be 42 degrees, not 45. Klaus had frozen, stared at him, then quietly tested the calculation. Samuel was right. Since then, they'd had an unspoken agreement. Klaus would work on problems out loud, as if talking to himself. Samuel would listen, silent as a shadow. And sometimes, in the softest whisper, Samuel would offer a correction, a suggestion, a solution. Klaus would pause, consider, never acknowledge Samuel directly, then make the adjustment and continue as if he'd thought of it himself. It worked because they were careful, because they were quiet, because Samuel never, ever wrote anything down where others could see. Until today. Today, Klaus wasn't in the workshop. He'd been called to help with a broken wagon wheel. And Master Thornton had brought his brother-in-law and 2 neighbors to see the workshop, showing off his property, his operations, his investments. They'd been standing there, discussing the staircase problem, when one of the neighbors, a mathematics professor from the college, had said with certainty, "Klaus is calculating it wrong. The spiral won't hold. You'll have uneven weight distribution." Samuel had been in the corner, organizing tools invisible as furniture, but he'd heard the wrong calculation being discussed. Heard them making it worse. And Klaus wasn't there to fix it. The numbers screamed in his head. The wrongness of it. Like hearing beautiful music played off key. His hand had moved before his mind could stop it. Chalk from Klaus's workbench. 3 steps to the floor space. And then his hand was drawing, calculating, solving. Muscle memory taking over. The pure relief of getting the numbers right, making them sing the way they were supposed to. He'd been so focused on the mathematics that he hadn't heard the conversation stop, hadn't noticed the 4 white men staring at him, hadn't seen Overseer Jackson's face go pale. The professor spoke first, his voice strange and tight. "Who taught you that?" Samuel's mouth went dry. "Nobody, sir. I saw. You saw? You saw a geometric calculation for a spiral staircase and just understood it? I'm sorry, sir. I shouldn't have. That calculation is correct." The professor's voice cracked. "I've been working on that exact problem for my own home. That's advanced mathematics. That's university-level geometry." Master Thornton's face had gone through several colors. Red, white, something in between. "Samuel, look at me." Samuel looked up, already preparing for the blow, for the punishment that was coming. But Thornton didn't look angry. He looked calculating, like a man who'd just found gold in his backyard and was deciding whether to celebrate or whether someone would try to steal it. "Overseer Jackson," Thornton said slowly, "lock this workshop. Nobody touches that floor. Nobody erases those marks." He turned to his brother-in-law. "Send a rider to Richmond. Tonight. Tell Dr. Cartwright I have something extraordinary for him to examine." As Samuel was marched back to the slave quarters, his mother's face appeared in the doorway of their cabin. She took one look at him, at the chalk dust on his hands, at the fear in his eyes, and she knew. Klaus found them after dark, his face stricken. "Boy, you're going to get us both killed. Master Thornton, he cannot know the extent of what you can do, but it was too late. The secret was out. The chalk marks were there. The proof was undeniable." Samuel sat on the dirt floor of his cabin that night, listening to his mother pray, and he did what he always did when he was afraid. He calculated how many hours until the doctor arrived. Calculated the distance from Virginia to the Deep South, where the worst plantations sent slaves to die. Calculated the odds of surviving what was coming next. Every equation came out the same. 0. As Samuel walked into a fitful sleep that night, he didn't know that tomorrow his life would become an experiment. That powerful men would travel from 3 states to test him. That abolitionists and scientists would both want to use him as a weapon. He only knew one thing with absolute certainty. He'd made a mistake. He'd let them see what he could do. And in 1859, for a slave in Virginia, being exceptional wasn't an opportunity. It was a death sentence. The morning sun cut through the workshop windows like blades of light, illuminating the chalk marks on the floor as if they were accusations. Samuel stood in the center of the room, wrists bound with rough hemp, flanked by Overseer Jackson and 2 of Thornton's field hands. The air smelled of fresh pine shavings and fear. Dr. Edmund Cartwright arrived just after breakfast, his carriage kicking up dust on the long drive from Richmond. He was a tall man, thin as a rail, with a face that seemed carved from old parchment. Sharp cheekbones, a pointed beard, and eyes that measured everything they fell upon. His coat was immaculate, black wool with silver buttons, and he carried a leather satchel that clinked with instruments. Calipers, measuring rods, a small brass scale, and notebooks bound in red leather. Richard Thornton greeted him at the door of the workshop, hand extended. Cartwright shook the hand briefly, already scanning the room. "Mr. Thornton, your message spoke of an anomaly." His gaze locked on the spiral staircase diagram. He stepped forward, boots clicking on the boards, and knelt beside the chalk lines. For a long moment, he said nothing, only traced the angles with a gloved finger. "Remarkable," he murmured. "The curvature is perfect. The rise and run, the torsion angle. This is not mere intuition." Thornton cleared his throat. "The boy did it. Samuel Carter, 12 years old." Cartwright rose slowly, turning to Samuel. His eyes narrowed, appraising. "Boy." Samuel obeyed, heart hammering. Cartwright circled him like a horse at auction, lifting his chin with a gloved hand to study his face. Samuel complied. Cartwright peered inside, then felt the shape of Samuel's skull with careful fingers, front, back, sides. Cranial capacity appears normal for his age. No unusual protrusions. He turned to Thornton. "None, sir. No school, no books." Cartwright gestured at the floor. "University-level work. The spiral's pitch is calculated to distribute load evenly." Thornton nodded. "That's why I summoned you. If this is real, if a Negro boy can do such things, it changes." Cartwright's lips thinned. "It changes nothing until proven. Pseudoscience is the enemy of truth." The examination began in the workshop, then moved to the main house parlor. Samuel was seated at a table, unbound now, but watched closely by Jackson. Cartwright laid out his tools, a slate, chalk, paper, and a set of geometric figures cut from wood. "First, basic arithmetic," Cartwright said. Samuel glanced at the bowl, perhaps 200 kernels. Cartwright counted himself. Next came geometry. Cartwright drew a triangle on the slate. Samuel did it without hesitation. Then a circle. Cartwright's eyes widened slightly. Pi approximated to 3 decimal places. By afternoon, the tests grew harder. Algebra, trigonometry, problems that would stump most college students. Samuel answered them all, his voice soft, his hands steady. He didn't look at Cartwright. He looked at the numbers as if they were the only safe place in the room. As the sun dipped low, Cartwright sat back, exhausted. This is impossible. No slave, no child should possess such facility. Thornton leaned forward. Cartwright rubbed his temples. There must be an explanation. Perhaps he was taught secretly, or... "No fluke," Thornton said. "I've watched him." Cartwright stared at Samuel. "You understand what this means, boy? If you are what you seem, you are a threat to the natural order. Science proves the Negro inferior." Samuel met his gaze for the first time. "I don't contradict anything, sir. I just..." Cartwright's face darkened. "We will continue tomorrow. Bring him to the house tonight." As they led Samuel away, Thornton whispered to Jackson, "Keep him close. No accidents." That night, in the big house attic, Samuel lay on a pallet, staring at the rafters. He heard his mother weeping in the quarters below, her prayers muffled through the floorboards. He calculated the hours until dawn. 8. The distance from here to the deep south, 300 miles. The odds of escape, negligible. But another number burned in his mind. The number of ways he could prove them wrong, or the number of ways they could break him. Chapter 3. The visitors. Word spread like fire through dry grass. By the third day, the Thornton plantation swarmed with men from Richmond, Petersburg, even as far as Charleston. Planters, professors, a journalist from the Richmond Enquirer, and 2 more scientists, disciples of Cartwright's craniometry work. They arrived in carriages, on horseback, drawn by the promise of a miracle or a monstrosity. The parlor became a courtroom. Samuel sat in the center, dressed in clean clothes Thornton had provided, white shirt, trousers, looking more like a schoolboy than a slave. Around him, the men debated. Cartwright presided, calm now, his doubt replaced by determination. Gentlemen, we face a paradox. The boy demonstrates abilities inconsistent with established science. One professor, a thin man from William and Mary, scoffed. Dissect? Metaphorically, Cartwright said. The tests were endless. Samuel solved riddles, calculated trajectories for cannon fire, predicted weather patterns from cloud formations. He recited passages from books he had never read, after hearing them once. The men murmured in awe, then in suspicion. Thornton watched from the corner, pride warring with fear. He had already received offers, buyers willing to pay a fortune for the boy, but he hesitated. Samuel was his discovery. On the 4th day, a new visitor arrived unannounced, a woman in a plain gray dress, veil pulled low. She introduced herself as Mrs. Eleanor Hayes, a widow from Boston, traveling south to visit family. Her accent was sharp, northern. I heard of the prodigy, she said. Thornton hesitated, but Cartwright waved her in. Let her see. Mrs. Hayes sat quietly, watching Samuel work. When the others broke for supper, she lingered. Alone with him for a moment, she leaned close. You are in danger, child, she whispered. These men will dissect you with their minds, then sell you to the highest bidder. Or worse. Samuel's eyes widened. A friend, she said. From the north. The Underground Railroad has ears everywhere. Before Samuel could answer, Jackson entered. Mrs. Hayes straightened, smiling. A remarkable boy, Mr. Thornton. That night, Samuel lay awake. Escape. The word tasted like freedom and death in equal measure. He calculated the risks, the patrols, the dogs, the swamps. Success rate, less than 5%. But staying meant becoming an experiment, a specimen, a proof of inferiority, even as he proved the opposite. The next morning, Cartwright announced the final test, a public demonstration in the town square. Samuel would solve a problem designed by a committee of experts, a complex bridge design involving calculus no slave should know. As they prepared, Thornton pulled Samuel aside. Do well, boy. Samuel nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. He thought of his mother, of Klaus, of the chalk marks that had changed everything. In the square, a crowd gathered, white faces, curious, hostile. Samuel stood before a blackboard, chalk in hand. The problem was immense. A suspension bridge across a wide river with wind loads and material stresses. He began to draw. Lines, angles, equations. The crowd hushed. As he finished, a gasp rose. The design was flawless. Cartwright stepped forward, face pale. But it wasn't. It was Samuel. And in that moment, as the applause began, grudging, uneasy, Samuel knew the secret was no longer his alone. It belonged to the world now, and the world would decide what to do with it. The town square of Willow Creek was not built for crowds this size. On the morning of the 5th day, it seemed the entire county had turned out. White men in Sunday best, women with parasols, children perched on fences, and a scattering of free Negroes standing at the edges, silent and watchful. The blackboard had been dragged into the center, propped against a wagon. Samuel stood before it, chalk in hand, the same clean shirt now wrinkled from sleepless nights. The committee of experts, 3 professors from Richmond College, a bridge engineer from Charleston, and Dr. Cartwright himself, had spent the previous evening crafting the ultimate test. The problem was a suspension bridge over the James River, 200 feet span with towers of specific height, cables of hemp and iron, wind loads estimated from recent storms, and material stresses calculated to prevent collapse under the weight of a loaded wagon train. It was a design problem that would challenge the best civil engineers in the country. They had no expectation that a slave boy could solve it. Cartwright addressed the crowd first, voice carrying over the murmurs. "Gentlemen, ladies, this demonstration will settle the matter. Science has proven the intellectual limitations of the African race. If the boy succeeds, it will be through trickery or coincidence." Thornton stood nearby, arms crossed, his face unreadable. He had already turned down 2 offers to buy Samuel outright, one for $5,000, another for land in exchange. He was waiting to see the outcome. Samuel looked at the blackboard. The equations were written in precise hand. Load distribution, tension vectors, parabolic curves for the cables. His heart raced, but the numbers came to him as they always did. Clear, inevitable, like a melody waiting to be sung. He began. First, the towers, height 30 feet, spaced 200 feet apart. He drew the supports, then the main cables, calculating the sagitta, the curve depth, to minimize material while ensuring strength. His chalk moved swiftly, numbers flowing. 1,100 pounds per linear foot, wind force at 30 miles per hour, modulus of elasticity for iron cables. He factored in the river's current, the soil composition beneath the piers, even the thermal expansion of steel in Virginia summers. The crowd watched in stunned silence. A child solving calculus in public? Impossible. Yet there it was, line by line, equation by equation. 10 minutes passed. 20. Samuel paused only to erase and correct a minor stress calculation, then continued. When he stepped back, the design was complete. A bridge that would stand for decades, efficient, elegant, beautiful in its mathematical purity. The engineer from Charleston approached the board, eyes wide. He traced the curves, checked the numbers, then turned to the committee. It is flawless. The load distribution is optimal. The cables will hold under twice the anticipated weight. This is not just correct. A ripple of disbelief spread through the crowd. Some clapped slowly, others stared in open hostility. Cartwright's face had gone ashen. He stepped forward, voice tight. This cannot be. But there was no error. Mrs. Hayes, the widow from Boston, had slipped into the back of the crowd earlier that morning. She watched now, her veil lowered just enough to see Samuel's face. When the applause died, she moved quietly through the throng, brushing past a group of planters. As the committee argued among themselves, she reached Samuel. Jackson was distracted, watching the professors. She leaned close. "Tonight," she whispered. "Midnight. The old oak behind the quarters. Bring nothing." Samuel's eyes flicked to her. He had calculated the odds again. Escape now, with the plantation in chaos, might be higher than before. Perhaps 10%. Still low, but not zero. He gave the slightest nod. That evening, the big house was alive with debate. Thornton hosted a dinner for the visitors. Samuel, seated at a small table in the corner, observed like a specimen. The professors argued over him. Was he a prodigy, a fraud, a threat to the institution of slavery? Thornton listened, but his mind was on profit. "The boy stays here," he said finally. After the guests retired, Samuel was returned to the attic. He lay awake counting the minutes. At 11:30, he slipped from the pallet, silent as a shadow. The house was dark, the servants asleep. He descended the back stairs, heart pounding, and slipped out into the night. The air was cool, scented with pine and river mud. He moved through the shadows, past the stables, toward the old oak. Every rustle made him freeze. He calculated the distance. 400 yards. Time, 8 minutes at his pace. He reached the tree. No one was there. Then a soft whistle from the darkness. Mrs. Hayes emerged, dressed in black, a hooded cloak. Behind her, 2 men, free Negroes, he guessed, waited with horses. "Quickly," she said. "We have a boat on the river." Samuel hesitated. "We'll try to get word to her later." He thought of Sarah's prayers, her warnings. He thought of the chalk marks, the bridge design, the way the world had looked at him today. Not as a boy, but as a thing to be studied, owned, destroyed. He nodded. They mounted and rode into the night, the horses' hooves muffled with cloth. Behind them, the plantation lights faded. Ahead lay darkness, uncertainty, but also possibility. Samuel looked back once. The big house stood silent under the moon. He calculated the miles to freedom. 400, perhaps 5. The odds, still slim. But for the first time in his life, the numbers felt different. Not 0. Not quite 0.